Go get me a latte, and make sure it's actually hot this time." Lucy didn't even look up from her phone as she barked the order. I didn't move. I just leaned over her desk, stared at the cakey foundation sliding off her nose, and said, "Fix your makeup before you speak to me, Lucy. You're looking less like a manager and more like Dracula in a bad light." The entire office went silent. And I mean silent. The kind of silence where you can hear the air conditioning cycle down, where keyboards freeze mid-stroke, where someone's coffee mug stops halfway to their mouth and just hovers there, suspended in disbelief. Lucy's jaw dropped. Powder cracked at the corners of her mouth. The foundation slide continued, tragically unbothered. I straightened my jacket, turned on my heel, and walked back to my desk. They didn't know the weak Omega they'd walked on for years had died last night, and I was the one who took his place. Let me tell you about Ren. That was his name, the original occupant of this body, this desk, this sorry excuse for a life. I know his name because I woke up in his apartment at 2 a.m. with his memories pouring into me like cold water into a cracked cup, and honestly, what I found in there made me furious on his behalf before I even opened his eyes. Ren was an Omega, second-class citizen in a world that had decided Omegas were decorative at best and exploitable at worst. He worked at Voss and Crane Enterprises, a mid-sized firm, corporate ladder, the usual Viper pet. He'd been there 3 years, and in 3 years, not one promotion, not one proper raise, not a single afternoon where he ate lunch sitting down. His job title said junior associate. His actual job was everything nobody else wanted to do. They sent him to the post office to pick up dry cleaning. Dry cleaning? For a senior manager who earned 4 times his salary and couldn't be bothered to drop off her own wool blazer on the way in. They sent him to buy coffee every single morning, not just for himself, not just for one person, but for a rotating cast of senior staff who couldn't locate the break room with a compass and a map. Valentine's Day. Ren was the designated flower runner. He spent the entire morning shuttling bouquets from the florist 3 blocks away because the seniors wanted roses delivered to their partners during their lunch break, like some kind of underpaid, unperfumed Cupid. Other days, it was chocolates, anniversary cards, birthday cakes, reservation confirmations, the full domestic infrastructure of other people's relationships, outsourced entirely to a man who didn't have time for his own. The worst part was that some of those errands weren't even for legitimate partners. Ren had picked up flowers more than once for people who had perfectly good fiancés sitting at home. He knew. He'd done the math. He'd said nothing, because Ren said nothing about anything. He just ran the errand and came back and filed the knowledge somewhere very quiet inside himself, where it sat and accumulated like interest. And the work. Let's talk about the work. Ren researched projects, full reports, data analysis, competitor breakdowns, market projections. The kind of work that took weeks of late nights and careful sourcing. And every single time, a senior manager would walk into the boardroom, flip open Ren's folder, and present the whole thing as their own. Not even a footnote, not a thank you in a hallway. He knew. Of course he knew. But he never said anything. He just went back to his desk and started the next report. And the interns, God, the interns. Even the interns dropped document copying jobs on his desk without a word. Fresh-faced kids, 22 years old, still figuring out how the printer worked, and they'd learned in their first week that Ren's desk was where unwanted work went to die. He'd sort it, he'd file it, he'd handle it. Because Ren was nice. Ren was accommodating. Ren had a people-pleasing reflex so deeply baked into him that he'd apologize for things that weren't his fault and thank people for things they should have been doing themselves. The gossip was constant. Office whispers that followed him into the elevator, into the bathroom, all the way down to the coffee shop 3 blocks away where he stood in line every morning with a list of 12 different orders, most of which had 3 modifications each. Did you see his presentation? His department head took the whole thing again. He just lets them. What kind of Omega just lets them? A weak one. And then, the CEO arrived. Not just any CEO. Cale Voss. The heir, the alpha, the kind of man who walked into a building and made the air pressure change. He'd taken over the company 6 months before Ren died, and the entire office had gone into a collective swoon that still hadn't fully resolved itself. Ren had met him exactly once in a meaningful way, and it was the most humiliating moment of his life up to that point, which, given the dry cleaning and the Valentine's Day flowers, was saying something. It was a Tuesday. Ren had spent 30 minutes actually running, to a restaurant nearly a kilometer away because Senior Manager Day had suddenly decided he wanted a specific prawn sandwich from a specific place that didn't deliver, and the order needed to be there by 12:30 or Day would make the next 3 months of Ren's life a slow-burning nightmare. He made it. He got the sandwich, he ran back. And he stepped into the elevator panting, sweat on his shirt collar, hair disheveled, the paper bag crumpled where he'd gripped it too hard. And Kale Voss stepped in behind him. The doors closed. Ren's memories of that moment came to me in high definition. The silence, the scent of the alpha filling the small space, the way Kale glanced at him once, just once, and the look on his face was not contempt exactly. It was worse than contempt. It was nothing. Total, complete dismissal. The look you give a piece of furniture. He looked at Ren, sweaty, breathless, clutching a damp paper bag, and he looked away. And he didn't look back. Ren stared at the elevator doors and felt himself shrink. That night, he went home to his one-room apartment. He ate half a bowl of instant noodles, he sat down on his narrow bed, and he thought about the sandwich, the flowers, the copies, the coffee, and the research reports with someone else's name on them, and the elevator. And his heart, which had been quietly overworked for months, just stopped. He was 26 years old. He died tired. In my world, they called me small but mighty. I was an assistant, yes, but I was the CEO's assistant in a firm that had 47 floors and a reputation that made competitors nervous. I'd been doing that job for 4 years. I knew every trick in the book because I'd written half the book. Expense padding, research theft, data manipulation. The thousand small corruptions that flourish in corporate environments when nobody's paying attention. I paid attention. I was 5'6", and I carried myself like someone who'd seen everything and wasn't particularly impressed. My CEO once told me, and this was a compliment coming from him, "You walk into a room like you're already planning how to leave it the fastest way possible." He meant it professionally. I took it as gospel. I don't know how I ended up here. I closed my eyes in my own world and opened them in Ren's apartment, his memory settling into me like sediment. I lay there in the dark for maybe 10 minutes, cataloging what I'd inherited, his job, his body, his social context, his utterly catastrophic reputation, and the scent memory of Kale Voss in an elevator which hit harder than it should have, considering everything. The man was distractingly handsome, even through someone else's memory. Dark eyes, jawline that looked carved, the kind of posture that came from people never telling him no his entire life. I noted this the way I noted everything, filed it, set it aside, and kept moving. I had a more immediate problem. The body I was in had bangs. Long, floppy, face-swallowing bangs that fell over Ren's forehead like a curtain someone had pulled across a window so the world outside wouldn't notice the room was in shambles. I found scissors in the bathroom. The long bangs were a hiding place. I cut them. Clean line. Now the forehead was visible. Now the eyes had somewhere to land. I looked at myself in the mirror, not for vanity, but the way you assess a battlefield before you choose your position. Good bones. Ren had good bones. That surprised me. He'd spent so much time making himself invisible that nobody had noticed he had a perfectly symmetrical face underneath all that anxiety and self-erasure. I showered. I found Ren's clothes, mostly inoffensive gray and beige things chosen specifically not to be noticed, and I pushed past them to the back of the wardrobe where there was a black-fitted blazer still in the dry cleaning bag. Never worn. He'd bought it for something once and then talked himself out of wearing it. I put it on. I found clippers in the cabinet and dealt with the uneven stubble on his jaw. Proper shave. Clean edges. I found a nail file and sorted out the chipped cuticles. Manicure pedicure, because if you're going to war, you don't go in with chipped armor. By 7 a.m., I was ready. I looked at myself one last time. Small but mighty, I thought. Then I picked up Ren's bag, walked out the door, and went to dismantle his entire previous life. The lobby security guard did a double-take. He'd seen Ren every morning for 3 years. I smiled at him, direct, no apology in it, and watched him scramble to say good morning back like I'd asked him a question. I took the elevator alone, pressed the button for the 14th floor, stood in the center of the car with both hands in my pockets. When the doors opened, I walked out like the floor had been waiting for me. The office was doing its usual morning dance, people drifting in, coffee mugs, laptop bags, the low hum of obligation. A few heads turned when I passed, then a few more. I sat down at my desk, Ren's desk, positioned right in the open plans section, surrounded by people who'd spent 3 years treating it as a convenient dumping ground, and I set my bag down, opened my laptop, and got to work. The first file arrived 3 minutes later. No words. Marcus from Logistics just walked past and placed a thick folder on the corner of my desk without looking at me, the way you drop something in a bin. The folder said Q3 Reconciliation, Cross-Reference, and Format on the tab. Work that should have gone to the intern pool. Definitely not Ren's department. Definitely not Ren's salary grade. I looked at the folder. I did not touch it. A second folder arrived 5 minutes later. Kim from Operations, same silent deposit, same studied non-acknowledgement. I did not touch that one either. The folders sat at the corner of my desk like small, hopeful pets I had no intention of adopting. And then Lucy arrived. Lucy was a senior associate with the energy of someone who'd peaked in a middle school clique and had spent the subsequent 15 years trying to recreate that particular power dynamic in every workplace she entered. She'd been one of the worst offenders in Ren's memories. The coffee orders, the dry cleaning, the Valentine's Day flowers. Lucy's name was on most of those. She'd once sent Ren to 3 different pharmacies on a Friday afternoon looking for a specific brand of painkiller because she had a headache and couldn't be bothered to do it herself on her lunch break. She walked over at 9:03 a.m., phone in hand, not looking up. "Go get me a latte and make sure it's actually hot this time." I let the silence stretch for exactly 3 seconds. Then I leaned over her desk, calm, unhurried, close enough that she'd have to look up. And I looked at her face, the thick foundation that had settled into her laugh lines and the edges of her nose like tide marks, the overdone contour that stopped at her jawline. And I said it. "Fix your makeup before you speak to me, Lucy. You're looking less like a manager and more like Dracula in a bad light." The floor dropped out of the room. I walked back to my desk. Lucy made a sound, something between a gasp and a splutter. I heard it and ignored it the way you ignore a car alarm that doesn't belong to your car. Behind me, someone's keyboard stopped. Someone else coughed once, sharply, the way people cough when they're suppressing a laugh with their entire body. I opened my email and started responding to the one project communication that was actually mine. The folders at the corner of my desk remained untouched. The latte situation resolved itself within the hour, not in the way Lucy had intended. At 10:15, Senior Manager Day, who had sent Ren running for that prawn sandwich, materialized beside my desk with the particular energy of someone who had already decided how the next 90 seconds were going to go. "The break room coffee maker's being difficult again," he said. "Run down and grab me an Americano from the cafe downstairs, would you? Black, 2 sugars." Day was mid-40s, senior pay grade. He did not once make eye contact while he said this. He was already turning away, confident in the outcome. I opened my desk drawer. In my 20 minutes before the office had fully populated, I had found the break room, located the coffee machine, a perfectly functional bean-to-cup model that probably cost the company $3,000 and that nobody had ever learned to operate because Ren had always been there to operate it for them, and printed out the manufacturer's quick start guide from the company intranet. I held it out. Day turned back, saw it, and frowned. "What's this?" "A manual," I said. "Step 3 covers the Americano setting. It takes about 4 minutes. Manageable." Behind Day, the elevator opened. Cale Voss walked in. I had not planned this. I want to be clear about that. The timing was coincidental. But I was not going to let coincidence make me flinch. I kept my eyes on Day. Day's eyes had gone sideways, tracking the CEO's entrance the way prey tracks a predator, instinctive, total attention. Cale Voss came to a stop about 4 feet away, clearly intending to cross to his office, but something made him pause. I could feel his attention like a weather change. The air in the room had done its usual pressurization. Day looked at the manual, looked at me, looked at the CEO. I said nothing. I just held the paper out with the steady patience of someone who had all morning. Day took the manual. He didn't say a word. He walked toward the break room with the posture of a man swallowing a very large, very uncomfortable amount of pride. I turned back to my laptop. In my peripheral vision, Cale Voss hadn't moved yet. Dangerous and handsome, Wren's memory supplied helpfully. Jawline, dark eyes, never smiles. Noted, I thought. Irrelevant for the next 45 minutes. Move on. I heard him walk to his office. The door clicked shut behind him. The room exhaled. I kept typing. The office had not yet recovered from the coffee manual. You could feel it in the atmosphere. Nobody quite knew where to place me now. Before, Wren had occupied a very specific ecological niche inside the company, harmless omega, permanent errand infrastructure, emotionally supportive office furniture with good formatting skills. Now people kept looking at me like I'd bitten through the bars of a cage while they were still arguing about whether the cage was locked. It was delightful. At 10:37 a.m., senior associate men approached my desk. Wren's memory supplied context immediately. Min handled external partnerships, mid-30s, chronically overconfident, expensive watches, the sort of man who flirted with receptionists while wearing an engagement ring and then acted inconvenienced when women remembered his name afterward. He dropped a black card onto my keyboard. "Need you to head to Maison Arel during lunch," he said. "Pick up the chocolate order under my name. Imported set. Gold ribbon packaging." He checked his phone while speaking. "It's for my fiancé. If they ask, tell them I approve the premium wrapping upgrade." I looked at the card. Maison Arel. Of course, it was somewhere ridiculous. Wren had memories of the place. Tiny luxury chocolatier, 3 blocks outside reasonable walking distance. Staff who looked at you like you personally offended cocoa beans if your shoes weren't expensive enough. Min kept talking. "And don't smudge the packaging this time. Last year the corners were bent." Last year? Meaning Wren had done this before. I leaned back slowly in my chair. "Question," I said. Min glanced up. "Your fiancé, blonde, works in interior design?" He blinked once. "Yeah. Why?" "Interesting." I picked up the black card between 2 fingers. I said, "If I eventually decide to go buy your chocolate, I'll make sure she also receives a complimentary report detailing the several women you've been cheating on her with." Silence. Pure, crystalline, immediate. The kind of silence that arrives so fast it almost has edges. 2 desks away, someone dropped a pen. Min stared at me. I stared back. Not aggressively, just with the calm composure of a man discussing weather patterns. His face changed color in stages. First confusion, then alarm, then the dawning horror of someone mentally reviewing every indiscreet decision they'd made within a 3-kilometer radius of the office. "What the hell are you talking about?" he hissed. I tilted my head. "Should I alphabetize them?" Across the floor, Leah made a choking noise that was definitely not a laugh and definitely sounded exactly like one. Min lowered his voice sharply. "Wren?" No, let's be respectful. Your fiancé deserves professionalism. Dates, locations, timestamps if possible. Maybe a color-coded chart." His eyes widened, and there it was. Confirmation. Honestly, cheaters hold it faster than cheap lawn chairs under direct eye contact. "You don't know what you're saying," he snapped. I rested my chin lightly against my hand. The woman from accounting knew, the bartender from Selene knew, The brunette from the finance retreat definitely knew because you argued with her in the hotel lobby at 2 in the morning, loudly. I smiled. You should really stop choosing public locations for emotional disasters. Min went completely still, which told me everything. Ren had noticed all of it. That was the thing about invisible people. Everyone performed around them because nobody believed they were being observed. Ren had carried years of other people's secrets quietly in his chest because he thought surviving meant silence. I did not share that philosophy. Min grabbed the black card off my desk so quickly he nearly bent it. "Forget it," he muttered. "Already done," I said. He turned and walked away with the rigid speed of a man attempting to flee both a conversation and his own life choices simultaneously. The office remained motionless for approximately 4 full seconds after he disappeared around the corner. Then the whispering started. Tiny, furious, electrified, like someone had thrown a live wire into the carpet. I reopened my laptop. Behind me, Marcus whispered, "Did Ren just threaten to expose Min's affairs?" Another voice whispered back, "Several affairs, apparently. How does he even know that?" I answered without looking up. "Observation skills," I said. Silence again. Then someone near the printers laughed so suddenly they had to fake it into a cough halfway through. I continued typing. 3 minutes later, a message notification appeared on the company chat from Leah. "You terrify people now." I typed back, "Correct?" 3 dots appeared. Then, "It's improving morale." I smiled beside myself, and from the glass walls of the executive corridor, unseen by most of the office, a pair of dark eyes watched the entire exchange with very careful attention before disappearing back behind a closing office door. Kale Voss apparently had excellent timing. Again. The morning briefing happened at 11 a.m. in the large conference room on the 14th floor. I walked in at 10:59 and took a seat, not at the edge where Ren apparently always sat, the invisible corner spot where he could be seen but pretended not to be, but at the main table, 3 seats from the head. Not aggressive, not deferential, just present. People noticed. The noticing was almost audible. The meeting opened with department updates, standard format. Each team was supposed to present a quick progress summary, status of current projects, blockers, and next steps. The problem was that Ren had been doing most of the actual work for 4 of those departments. I knew it because his memories had shown me the late nights, the research tabs, the spreadsheets, the polished reports handed over to senior associates who then presented them upward as their own work. Ren had never said anything. He'd just refilled the cup for whoever was thirsty. So when the facilitator called for updates, there was a specific beat that I recognized immediately. Everyone looked at me. Not at their own notes, not at their own screens. At me. Because Ren had been the one with the numbers. Ren had been the one who could tell you where the Q2 data discrepancy was buried. Ren had been the one keeping the machine running while other people took credit for the output. They looked at me and waited. I looked back at them. I said, "I'm ready to present on my project." Silence. "Anything else on that list?" I gestured broadly at the whiteboard where departments were listed. "The relevant files are on your desks. Several of them have been there since morning. I left them exactly where I found them." Manager Cho, who was heading up the Kellner account, sat forward. "Ren, the Q3 projections for my department are in your Q3 folder, which I compiled, which has your name on it, which you can open yourself." Cho blinked. "I'm not getting your salary, or yours," I glanced along the table, "or anyone else's at this table, except mine. I'll cover my own work. The rest of you are going to have to cover yours." The room didn't quite know where to put that. Some people looked at the table. One of the junior staff near the back of the room, someone who looked like they'd been run ragged in Ren's place for years, made a tiny movement that might have been a suppressed fist pump. "Now," I said, and I stood up picking up my folder. "My project." My project was the Halcyon partnership bid. Ren had spent 11 weeks on it. I knew every page because I'd absorbed it along with everything else: the market analysis, the competitor mapping, the projected ROI model, the risk assessment. It was good work, clean, thorough, the kind of thing that actually moves a decision. I presented it in 15 minutes. No filler, no hedging, just the data and what it meant. When I finished, there was a silence that felt different from the earlier ones. Less shocked, more attentive, like the room had recalibrated. And then Senior Manager Park cleared his throat. Park was 51, had been with the company 12 years, and had built a very comfortable senior position on the foundation of knowing how to position himself near good work without doing any of it. He'd gotten credit for the last 2 of Ren's reports. I knew this because I could feel Ren's quiet, resigned fury buried somewhere in the memories like a stone at the bottom of a clear stream. The projections align with some analysis I've been developing on the Halkian account, Park said smoothly, flipping open a folder. I think we should cross-reference. That's my analysis, I said. Not loud, not hot, just flat and clear. Park looked up. I beg your pardon? The methodology on page 4, the risk tier structure on page 7, the competitor positioning index, which isn't a standard model, it's one I built from scratch. I opened my own folder and placed it on the table. These are my working notes, date stamped, version history attached. If you'd like to cross-reference, I'd suggest starting there. Park's composure didn't break. He was too experienced for that. But something around his eyes went very still. The segment breakdown on page 12, and I heard my own voice doing the thing it did in my previous life when I was untangling someone's accounting tricks, precise, patient, almost bored. Uses a weighting system that weights by quarter-on-quarter velocity instead of annual average. That's not a default metric. It's specific to this account because of its contract renewal cycle. The only way you'd know to use it is if you built the model. Did you build the model, Park? The room was stone. Park said nothing. Then I'd appreciate it if you didn't reference it as yours. I sat back down. At the head of the table, I was aware, without looking directly, that Cale Voss had been in the room for this. He'd slipped in during the presentations, taken the head chair, and sat there in the particular stillness of someone who was processing something they hadn't expected. I did not look at him. Dangerous and handsome, Ren's memory offered, again, apparently on a loop. Very cold, dismissed you without looking. The elevator. I know, I thought. I was there. Stay focused. One of the junior staff, Leah, whose name I pulled from Ren's memory, raised her hand carefully. The figures on the secondary market entry, the ones in the appendix, are those of your projections as well? Yes, I said. They're the most accurate breakdown of the segment I've seen, she said, with the careful phrasing of someone who had never been allowed to say such a thing in a meeting before. I know, I said. Laughter. Actual, helpless, surprised laughter from 3 or 4 people around the table, the kind that happens when someone says the quiet part out loud and it lands exactly right. Park had found a very interesting pattern in his folder's cover and was studying it intently. The meeting wrapped up 20 minutes later. I gathered my notes. I did not look at the head of the table. I walked to the door, and I was almost through it when I heard a moment. Low. Even, the voice of someone who didn't usually have to ask twice. I paused. I turned around. The room had emptied out fast, people with excellent survival instincts apparently, because they recognized the specific frequency of an alpha CEO who wanted a private conversation and vacated accordingly. Even Park had vanished, which was frankly miraculous given his physical volume. Kyle Voss stood at the head of the table. He was taller than Ren's memory had made him seem, or maybe the memory had tried to compress him, to make him smaller, more manageable. He wasn't smaller. He filled the room like cold fills a room when a window opens, immediately, completely, without asking. Dark eyes, that jaw, the kind of face that made you angry at it for existing because it was entirely too effective. You dismissed him, I thought. And for a second, it wasn't my thought, it was Ren's. The elevator, the sweat on his collar, the nothing in those eyes. You looked at him like he was furniture. I set that down. It wasn't useful yet. Cale looked at me the way he imagined he looked at documents that didn't add up, like something was off and he was going to find it. "You're different today," he said. Not a question, not really an observation either. An opening if I wanted to take it. "People change," I said. "They don't usually change overnight." "Usually," I agreed. Another silence. He had excellent silence, the kind that other people filled with anxiety. I'd spent 4 years working for someone who used silence as a boardroom tactic. I knew how to sit in it. "The Halcyon analysis, the risk tier structure, the velocity weighting." "Yes." "That's the kind of methodology I'd expect from someone at a senior analyst level at minimum." "Yes," I said again. Something moved through his expression, not quite discomfort, more like recalibration, like a map that was turning out to be wrong about a significant landmark. He studied me for another moment, then, "We should discuss your role." "We should," I agreed. I picked up my folder. "I have a counterproposal for that conversation." His eyebrow moved, fractional and elegant. "A counterproposal?" 50% salary increase, senior analyst designation effective next pay cycle, and the Halcyon bid goes under my name, credited properly. All of it. A beat. "That's a significant ask," he said. "It's a significant amount of work that's been running this office quietly for 3 years. I'm being generous calling it a counterproposal. I could call it corrective accounting." Cale Voss looked at me for a long moment. He had the eyes of someone who was very rarely surprised, and was currently very rarely being surprised. It was, I thought, a good look on him, much more interesting than the blankness in the elevator. "Stop noticing his face," I told myself. "You are in the middle of a salary negotiation." He said, "I'll have the contracts office prepare a revised agreement." And something in his voice had shifted barely perceptibly from the flat authority of a man issuing directives to something more. "Good," I said. I walked to the door. "Ren?" I stopped. I didn't turn around. "I'd like to continue this conversation outside the office." A pause. Just long enough to be interesting. "Dinner." The word landed carefully, like it had been considered. I felt it. The pull of it, the involuntary warmth that came from somewhere in Ren's chest and collided with my own perfectly objective assessment that Cale Voss was, in fact, the most attractive man I had ever encountered across 2 separate worlds, and that the warmth was completely justified from a purely logical standpoint. I also felt the memory of the elevator, the nothing in his eyes. Furniture, the way Ren had shrunk. I turned my head, just enough to speak over my shoulder. "You get the contract sorted," I said, "and maybe we'll see." I walked out. Behind me, through the closed conference room door, I could have sworn I heard one quiet, involuntary exhale, the kind that happens when someone who has never been uncertain suddenly is. Good, I thought. He can wait. The rest of the day ran like a controlled demolition. The 2 folders that have been sitting on my desk since morning, Marcus's and Kim's, were still there when I returned. I picked them up, walked to the relevant desks, placed them down, and said, "These are yours." I didn't explain it. I didn't soften it. I put them down the way they'd put them on my desk and walked away. Marcus called after me. "Ren, that's always been your—" "Check the job description," I said, without turning around. Mine doesn't say anything about Q3 reconciliation. Lucy had, since the morning, avoided my general area with impressive dedication. The Dracula comment had spread, I could tell from the texture of the glances I was getting, the whispers that stopped just barely too late as I passed. A few of the junior staff looked at me with expressions hovering somewhere between shock and something close to admiration. Leah stopped by my desk in the mid-afternoon. She put a mug of coffee on my desk. Actual, good coffee, from the machine, made by human hands, and said, very quietly, "You're a fast learner." I looked at her. "On the coffee machine," she added, clearly deciding that explanation was safer than the alternative. I picked up the mug. "Thank you, Leah." She walked back to her desk with the posture of someone who has just done something mildly terrifying and is pleased with themselves about it. I drank the coffee. By 4 p.m., the informal consensus of the office, gathered through whatever osmosis these things travel by, was that something had changed. Not articulated precisely, not confronted directly, just a general atmospheric adjustment in how people moved around my desk. The files stopped appearing. People stopped mid-approach when they caught my eye. Good. At 4:45, Park appeared at my desk. He stood there for a moment that was clearly very uncomfortable for him, and then he said, stiffly, "The sources for the velocity weighting in the Hallian model, I'll need them for the client presentation. I'll prepare a proper credit section under my name." Another uncomfortable pause. Then, "Fine." He walked away. I let myself think for just a moment about Ren, about the 11 weeks of work, the late nights, the careful sourcing, the quiet hope buried somewhere in it that someone would notice. Someone had noticed now. That was something. At 5 o'clock exactly, Cale Voss's office door opened. He came out the way he always apparently did, jacket on, phone in hand, ready to leave. The office did its usual low-level flutter, eyes tracking, hands finding things to look busy with. He paused in the middle of the floor, looking at me. I was shutting down my laptop, unhurried. He crossed the floor, stopped at my desk. The man moved like he owned the building, which technically he did, so fair enough. "The contracts office will have the revised offer ready Monday morning," he said. "I'll review it Monday afternoon," I said. I adjusted the seniority classification upward. I looked up to senior analyst, reporting directly to me, separate from the current reporting structure. I held his gaze for a moment. The offer was better than I'd expected. He'd moved faster than I'd expected. Something in that efficiency, the decisiveness of it, was objectively extremely attractive. I closed my laptop bag. "And the Halcyon credit?" I asked. "Joint presentation. Your methodology is credited fully." "That's a start," I said. A beat. "The dinner offer," he said. Not quite a question. Almost. I'd still like to continue the conversation. I picked up my bag, stood. I came up to his collarbone, which in my previous life would have been a relevant disadvantage. Here, I found I didn't particularly care. I looked up at him and held eye contact the way you hold a position, steady, unflinching, choosing to be there. Dangerous and handsome, the memory supplied, no longer feeling like Ren's thought so much as my own honest assessment. The jawline is frankly unreasonable. "Monday," I said, "after I've read the contract. And if the contract is satisfactory, then we'll talk about dinner." I let that settle. Maybe. The corner of his mouth, the most controlled, contained, carefully neutral mouth I had ever watched, moved, just slightly, the ghost of something. "Monday," he said. I walked to the elevator. The doors opened. I stepped in. I turned around. He was still standing where I'd left him, watching me with an expression I could not read entirely, but could feel, the way you feel a change in weather, something shifting, a system moving in. The doors closed. I exhaled just once. He can wait, I thought. He can absolutely wait. But I was smiling. I stood in the elevator alone. In this same elevator, approximately 14 hours ago in this body's history, Ren had pressed himself into the corner and made himself as small as possible so that the man wouldn't have to acknowledge him. He'd stared at the doors and felt himself disappear. I stood in the center, hands in my pockets, eyes forward. The ground floor light counted down, calm and indifferent. What I was taking home tonight was a promise, the contract on Monday, the Halcyon credit. The clean line that had been drawn across the day like a border. This is mine, this is not, and the difference is no longer negotiable. What I was also taking home, and not examining too closely in a moving elevator, was the image of Cale Voss's expression when I'd said, maybe. The micro-shift, the something that had moved behind those carefully controlled eyes. He has no idea what to do with someone who doesn't immediately say yes, I thought. And that is deeply professionally useful information. Also, I noted, in the spirit of honesty, he was never going to be furniture, and I was never going to let anyone else feel like they were. But he was going to have to work for it. The lobby opened in front of me. I walked out. The security guard said, "Good night." I said, "Good night," and I meant it. Epilogue. The contract was good, better than good. It was thorough, it was fair, and it had my work credited correctly, properly, completely in writing. I read every line, made 2 annotation notes, signed it. Then I went to Cale Voss's office door and knocked. "Come in." He looked up from his desk. Something shifted in his face when he saw me. Not surprise exactly, more like the particular attention that someone pays to a thing that has started to occupy a significant amount of their mental bandwidth without their full consent. I set the signed contract on his desk. "The raise," I said, "and the title." He picked it up, glanced at my signatures, set it down. "And dinner?" "Dinner," I said, "is separate." "Name the terms," he said, and there was something in the way he said it, deliberate, careful, that told me he understood, finally, that this was a different negotiation than any he'd run before. I looked at him across the desk. Dangerous and handsome, controlled and cold, and currently sitting across from me trying very hard to appear like this was a normal business conversation and not like he'd thought about this moment approximately 15 times since Friday. He's going to have to earn it, I thought, every bit of it. "Pick somewhere without a waiting list and make a reservation." I walked out. Behind me, I heard one thing, the quiet sound of a CEO picking up his phone for the first time in his life to make a reservation himself. Small but mighty, I thought. Works every time. The end.